everyone, to the next edition of the DK Down Under Show, presented by dailyfantasyrankings.com.au in conjunction with rotogrinders.com. I'm Smatho 10, along with my AFL Daily Fantasy host here, the Big Hef. Mate, we've got Geelong and Collingwood in Perth on Thursday night AFL. How are you today, first of all, and what are your thoughts on this particular matchup?
I'm good. I was just thinking we haven't had Collingwood on a big Friday night, Thursday night game for a while. We have them every bloody week, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, interesting. First time these two teams have ever played over in WA against each other. We mentioned this on the Draft Stars show, but the Perth ground is the same dimensions as Collingwood's home ground, the MCG, and it's quite different to Geelong's home ground. So if you're trying to work out any sort of home ground advantage, obviously there isn't one, but the shape probably suits Collingwood, if anything.
All right, so let's break down this particular matchup. I mean, before we get into our DraftKings core, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for further content here from Daily Fantasy Rankings. Thank you for all of our viewers who have watched our shows and provided feedback over the last few weeks. It's been much appreciated. So, yes, we're in Perth. Now, Cats are outsiders at plus 102. The Pies are minus 125. Spreads at 2.5. And the total is actually a very low 102.5 points. We are experiencing some wet weather in Perth throughout this week. And checking the meteorology site at the moment, we have a showers of a late storm likely for Perth on Thursday night. So 95% chance of rain, around 10 to 15 millilitres. So that is quite a significant amount of rain. In terms of the team news, Will Kelly, who came in for his first game last week, he's actually out after busting his elbow. Jordan Ngoe should be back in the side after his 1 week suspension. Josh Dacos is on track to play as well, so he might be on the Pie side. For the Cats, Mitch Duncan and Quinton Narkle suffered hamstring injuries and is unlikely to play. And Jack Stephen, who was managed last week, he should be back in the side as well. Just a note here, we are recording for team lists have dropped here for the AFL. So, disclaimer there, if we mention any players that do not play, so be it. It is our trend here on the DK Down Under show. So, Hef, we talked about it in previous episodes about wet weather footy. Just want to quickly highlight your strategy in terms of what happens when we're playing in the wet.
Okay, basically wet weather just means there's going to be more stoppages, possessions usually more contested. So we give a big boost to the ruckman, we give a big boost to the tacklers. There's usually a lot more tackles in a match. And we give a boost to guys who can win contested possessions. They can go and win their own ball. And the guys who rely on uncontested possessions, they don't seem to get them as many in wet conditions, as it's a lot harder to use the ball effectively. So that's what we're looking for in wet weather games.
Excellent. All right, so let's break down the 4 positions available here on DraftKings contests, and I will build a core of a team as we go along. As always, we start here with the ruck position, and it's likely that we're going to have 3 choices for this particular matchup. We talk about it on every Friday show, which is about Brody Grundy. He's currently at 9,000 on DraftKings, and he's going to go up against the probably an inexperienced option in Darcy Fort, which is 5,000. And a key forward in Sava Radigalia, who's been having some helping out in the second ruckman as well at 4,400. As we mentioned, this game is forecast to be wet, so there's going to be some highlighted fantasy scoring here between these particular players. We talk about how Grundy's safe as houses, but he let us down with just a 50-plus point performance last week. So can we go back to Grundy, or should we go the value options of Fort and Radigalia?
Look, first off, I don't really want to be playing Radigalia. Ford has been the main man in the ruck for Geelong. Radigalia will be playing up forward, and I think the wet conditions are going to make it hard for him to take marks, which is where he relies on a lot of his points. So happy to leave him alone unless we get word that the rain's not going to hit. They're a little bit closer together than they are on Draft Stars, these two. So I tend to lean to Grundy with just the 4,000 difference, but I think Fort's a fine play as well. Lean to Grundy, if anything, there.
All right, well, let's put Grundy in at his 9,000 salary. I reckon he will bounce back in these particular conditions in there. So let's move on to defence. Now, I want to highlight one of our key tools here on the Daily Fantasy Rankings website, which is also free to use at any time. It's our points against graphs here, which shows you a great breakdown on teams' fantasy scoring scored against them. And as you can see here, I've got here the backs position top 3 scores, which shows the top 3 better players for each team. Collingwood are giving up number 1 fantasy points against at 78, compared to the Cats down there at last position at 55. Now, normally in a dry game, we'll be all over the Cats here, but does the wet weather play a part here? And the key injury to Tom Stewart as well. It's kind of mucked this up a bit for us.
Yeah, the weather definitely plays a part, because making up this high score that Collingwood allow to defenders is usually a lot of mark, kick, plus sixes to opposition defenders as they chip the ball from one side of the ground to the other in their defence. Collingwood tend to let teams do that and set up behind, waiting for that next kick to come. You'll find in wet conditions that teams aren't quite as liberal in chipping around in the back line. They'll tend to play it a little bit safer and kick for territory up the wings rather than try and change sides of the ground. So the wet conditions is going to have a bit of effect here, but this is clearly the number one trend in this game, is that all the data points to Geelong defenders. And you'll notice on our cheat sheets too that a lot of the Geelong defenders are popping up near the top in terms of value. So I think we still lean that way, but just be wary that the wet conditions can impact that a bit.
Zach Tui, Harry Taylor and Mark Blixas are probably the 3 safest options for Geelong Cats defenders. You could get cute looking at other options, but would you just consider either 1 or 2 of those 3 mentioned then?
Yeah, I would. I'll be working around the likes of O'Connor as well, and probably not so much Henry, because he tends to be more reliant on marking. But the 3 you mentioned and O'Connor, they would be my... Did you mention O'Connor?
No, I didn't.
No, good. I had a terrible feeling you did. Yeah, they would be the ones I want to work around, definitely.
All right, well, just for you then, I'll put O'Connor in our little core team here for us. So we'll move on to the midfield. Now, these 2 midfields are stacked. As we all know from previous shows, we've got a great Collingwood midfielder in obviously Taylor Adams and Treloar and Pendlebury, etc., going up against Dangerfield and Selwood. For the Cats, there's not much value in this particular position, so it looks like we need to pay up here. So Collingwood or Geelong, or a bit of both?
Oh, look, I don't lean one way in particular in this game. Both teams have got some very good inside midfielders who are suited to wet conditions. Joel Selwood's one who obviously stands out for Geelong at 6,100. Dangerfield, there's no knock on him at all in the wet. He loves to go and get his own ball. For Collingwood, Taylor Adams is definitely a good wet weather footballer. And then you've got some cheaper options here too. At 5,800, you've got Cam Guthrie, who can play in the middle of the ground and a very good tackler. And for Collingwood, Rupert Wills is much in the same mould at 5,100. He looks a really good play in conditions which are likely to suit as well.
Is there anyone off the top of your head now that are not really a wet weather specialist who look for that cheap, uncontested possession on the wings, etc.?
Look, not so much. There's a guy like Tom Phillips who's been pretty down this year, but he's that fits that type of wingman mould that doesn't get involved quite as much as most of the others. But both teams are really strong inside. Even a guy like Pendlebury that is a bit classier, more so than being a bull. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. But yeah, there's plenty of options here. Maybe Menengola is one that is more outside and isn't quite as suited by these conditions.
Yeah, I saw that his projection on our cheat sheets do pop out a little bit against his price there at 6,500. So possibly a trap play. Would you agree with that?
Potentially, but yeah, I don't think he's definitely not a huge fade by any chance. But he's the type of player that would maybe look to avoid if you're going down that path.
All right. The one you probably haven't mentioned, but we'll mention in the forwards, is a Brandon Parfitt at $7,000. Tackling machine that he is, add some wet weather. I think he's almost our lock of the slate. Would you think?
Oh, look, I've got to agree with that. Also, for the fact that you don't really want to be playing the forwards in these conditions. It's so hard to really dominate a game when it's a really slippery ball and you've got someone on your hammer the whole time. So to be able to play a guy like Parfitt in our forward positions, who's going to spend a lot of time through the midfield, like you say, great tackler, basically leading the league in tackles. So he just looks perfectly suited here. Looking a bit cheaper. A couple of guys for Collingwood who also run through the middle of the ground, more so than being stuck up forward. Jordan De Goey, who's returning here at 4,900. It just loaded with talent, huge, big, strong body. No reason he can't pop off. But yeah, he's not a huge fantasy scorer, but he does have the potential to go off and with a slate-winning score. And the other guy is Jamie Elliott, who is still really well priced here on DraftKings. If he is picked, he only had 40-something last week, but it's worth noting that he played very little time in the second half. He had a bit of a shin or a calf complaint, and he has been getting more and more time in the midfield. So in wet conditions where teams are going to get a lot of players around the ball, he's one of the forwards for Collingwood who'll be sent into the midfield a bit more often.
Excellent. All right, so there's our little core team here for DraftKings for this Thursday night match between Collingwood and Geelong. Just make sure you keep an eye on at Rankings DFS on Twitter. We'll update you with some weather conditions pre-lock on Thursday night here. Teams will come out from the AFL on Wednesday night here in Australia, so make sure you get to rotogrinders.com and dailyfantasyrankings.com.au for all your AFL daily fantasy needs. Hef and I are back for Friday night footy, which is the Bulldogs and the Bombers, so we're looking forward to breaking down that particular matchup. Hef, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, mate. Good luck to everyone.
Thanks very much, and we'll catch you next time on the Down Under Show.